Hey guys, 14 Fluffies here. Today I am bringing you my Hero deck profile for December 2019. I had to take a little break from uploading for a bit because of Thanksgiving and all that stuff. It kind of just snuck about on me on nowhere, so that's why it took a while for me to make time to upload. So yeah, without further ado, let's continue with the deck profiles. And for the most part, this profile isn't really much different from my last one. There's a few differences in the side and extra deck, and a few changes to like hand trap ratios in the main deck, and some other choices that are more fit for the format. As my intention for my last deck profile is more to be like a skeleton for heroes in that format, and this is my first attempt at. Well, it's not my first attempt, but this is my first like recorded draft of like how I feel like heroes should be playing in this format with as far as like tech choices. So yeah, the deck core is relatively the same as last time, so let's just get into it. Starting off, we got 3 Stratos. Nothing to really explain here. Searches, popping spells and traps. The popping spells and traps doesn't come up all that often, but when it does, it's always very critical. When I play against True Dracos or most control decks, the effect normally comes up at least once every match or so. So not that inconsistently, but against pretty much any other matchup, though, you're almost exclusively going to be searching from it. Next up, 3 Ferris. Also a very powerful starter. Also an extender because Stratos can search it, and most of the time you're getting access to this card, it's going to be off of Stratos. You could potentially also search it off Shadow Mist or Cross Crusader, but that's not nearly as often. You're either going to hard draw it or add it off Stratos. So it's easily the best extender and starter because of the fact that it can set up your graveyard and just get to your fusion spells, get your increase, get Vion, all that. Next up for the spell starters, we got the 1 Hero Lives, best starter in the deck easily because getting to Stratos without using your normal summon is incredibly powerful. Very much so, and it's really amazing. And for the most part, if you do open it, you can almost always go for game, and it's, even at worst, if it's going to be Ash Bait, so it's just amazing. And and it is limited, sadly. Hopefully, maybe Konami might put it to 2. It's possible. It may not happen. It doesn't matter really to me because the deck is still ridiculously consistent. And then next up for more starters, I put Emergency Call in starters because it's just 3 more copies of Stratos, along with the 1 Rhoda, which is also another copy of Stratos, drawing it out to 8 copies of Stratos overall. And for our final big power starter, we have Fusion Destiny. This card also serves the purpose of, this card is like a massive graveyard setup. It also could extend for if you're going for Dystopia. But if you're going for using Fusion Destiny as your starter and sending Dangerous, that will also be an immensely powerful starter, although you will be limited as far as what you can special summon, which isn't really all that big of a deal. It just limits what you'll be getting off of what you can actually summon from Solid Soldier, which even then, like, most of the time with Solid Soldier, you're just going to, like, most of the time with Solid Soldier under Fusion Destiny, you might not even special summon anything from hand with it regardless, just because you need it for the, you just need to be on field for fusion summoning and get Shadow Mist from the graveyard. So yeah, it's a very powerful card, and it should always be ran at 3 of. And yeah, that wraps up the starters at 14. I feel like that's pretty much the standard number. I see people attempt to run 2 Stratos, and I'm just not a fan of it. I'm also not a fan of people playing 2 Emergency Call. I feel like 3 is the perfect number because you want to be as consistent as possible. And continuing on with extenders. First off, 3 Malicious, very potent, very powerful. Drawing 2 is not really that big of a deal, like I've discussed in my previous videos about playing with bad hands. 3 is an insta-scoop, and 2 is inconvenient if you don't have Ferris or access to Ferris, but it's still perfectly playable. Next up, 2 Shadow Mist. Very important extender for getting to your combo pieces as well as searching Mass Change. More often than not, you will just be using its Graveyard Effect to add more combo pieces. Whether that be like Graveyard Effect to add Stratos to get to Ferris, or adding Ferris. Using it as fusion material with polymerization to add Honest Neos for your Trinity. Stuff like that. Very important interactions, and anytime it hits the graveyard, it essentially gets you more pieces that you can use, as well as the Mass Change Search. 2 Solid Soldier. most people play one. Some builds I've even seen topping regionals don't even play it at all, which is interesting to me because I feel like this is a pretty safe choice as a 2 of. As a 1 of, it's also pretty safe, but I like to have the ability to have another one for the second turn play. So sure, it does suck when you draw 2 of it. It's kind of unfortunate, but that doesn't really happen to me that much. Overall, I just think it's a really good card to have in multiple copies because it helps you help see it more. It's more consistent, and your most optimal plays in your card actually involve having this card in hand. So I see no reason not to run 2 of it since I can make room for it. And for extenders, 2 Vion. You get this off of increase most of the time, although summoning Vion with Solid Soldier is also very good for situations where things like Ferris get interrupted, or if you just saved your normal summon and stuff like that. And the way you'd play around Nibiru is that you would obviously save your normal summon for either Solid Soldier plus anything, or just tribute summoning Ferris with the Nibiru token. Sometimes it can be hard to save your normal summon, but if you have a Hero Lives or Fusion Destiny, it's possible. So yeah, you can do those things. You just need to, it's all depending on if you can really sniff out the opponent's Nibiru through things like verbal cues and stuff like that. And the additional extender, 1 draw hand. I love this card even more now than I did before because of just playtesting it way and way more. Because Cross Crusader summoning this thing from the graveyard is amazing. And there's almost no downsides to it. Almost every single time I've resolved draw hand, it's always been beneficial for me and not for the opponent. Especially considering how hand traps are at an all-time low in usage right now. Bar, D, Crow, and Nibiru. But Nibiru has largely been moved to side decks, so I'm less concerned about hand traps, my opponent drawing hand traps off of this. So it doesn't really matter. Especially if you're going second, you won't care about what your opponent draws if you're going for game. And for the last extender, we got Fusion Substitute. There's Poly still in here, but I consider Poly more of an engine requirement, although Poly could also be an extender. It could be a starter as well if you're ditching cards that can have graveyard effects, like the Shadow Mist and the Mally. They can make those live as well. But I consider Fusion Substitute to be a much better extender for a combo and actually fit the definition of an extender much more, since its whole purpose is just to progress your plays and not necessarily to establish your win condition. Because of Fusion Sub's graveyard effect, being able to put back your fusions to the extra deck and recur them back to the extra deck and get you more resources, which I consider to be very powerful. And that will wrap up the extenders. And next up, we got, well, technically the engine requirements, but really, like, these engine requirements barely meet the specifications of engine requirements, because really they serve the purpose of being extenders. And that would be 2 increase. Pretty obvious that this would be in the pretty obvious that 2 increase has been the golden ratio in Heroes for the longest time. 1 is not enough. 3 is obviously way too many. You virtually never want to draw this card, but having 1, if you draw the 1, is just terrible. Having 2 in deck basically means that you'll always be able to resolve Ferris at least once, as long as you don't draw both. And even then, being able to get it back from the graveyard is also really potent and very often forgotten about, at least with more novice pilots of the deck. So yeah, always important to remember increase. And Poly, like I mentioned before, I consider an engine requirement more so than an extender, but it still serves the purpose of an extender. It's still very important. And that wraps up the engine requirements. Very low engine requirement counts, and even then they're almost, for the most part, besides increase, these cards are never bricks. They're always relatively important. It just, sometimes opening up too many extenders and too many of these quote engine requirements can be pretty sucky. And then for the defensive cards, we got Honest Neos and Dynatag. Dynatag can also be considered an engine requirement. Actually, both of these can, but because they don't really serve a purpose of extending combos, and really they're just more for like dropping Honest Neos on Trinity for the OTK, and banishing this from the graveyard to boost Dystopia for the pop. But these 2 can be used defensively. Obviously, Dynatag can be sent from hand to graveyard to reduce battle damage to 0 and then burn for 1,000. So that has its applications. And And if you know you're playing against an OTK strategy, you could be big-brained and actually put Dynatag to your hand, so that way if you know you can't game them, you could at least survive for another turn. That is the thing. Honest Neos could also be used as a hand trap version of Dynatag, being able to target your Dystopia and be able to get a pop. So yeah, that is a thing. Two Ash Blossom. I cut this down because hand traps just in general are kind of losing favor, and I wanted to have something that covered more matchups because of running into control decks and just losing the floodgates, and then just Ash Blossom not doing as much as I wanted it to. It's still a very potent hand trap, and besides DD Crow and Nibiru, I would consider it one of the best available for the price. So yeah, I would still recommend playing it, even though it's not as good as it should be or used to be. And last up for the defensive cards, 2 Cosmic. This card is really amazing. I wish I had a playset of it, because I would definitely just play 3 of it. But 2 is fine. I was trying Twin Twister in the main deck for a while and absolutely hated it, but because the best part about it for me really was just the discard, because a quarter of the deck is discard fodder. So really, I consider this just to be way better because it stops all graveyard floating for spells and traps. It baits out the Crescendo and the Roars. And yeah, it just keeps itself relevant, and it's still really powerful. And the 1,000 life point cost is basically non-existent. Next up, for the bombs, we still have the 1 Plasma. Very important, because just being amazing in general. Searchable skill drain, put it on the field. Good going first or second, because it can attach opponents' monsters and equip it. So, very important effects, and there have been times where I've actually summoned 2 Plasmas in 1 duel because of Emerald, which was hilarious, but it is what it is there. It's just funny. And then next up, other 2 bombs, we got 2 Kaijus. Yes, these do conflict with Cross Crusader, which does suck a lot, but really, Kaiju's wrecked 3 of the best decks right now, which actually 4 of them, because Thunder Dragon, which would be Sky Striker, Orchist, and Salad, and Thunder as well, but to a lesser extent. For Striker, obviously, if you tribute one of their links and then put this in their main monsters on, they're locked out of their back row. Against Orchist and Salad, this turns off their counter traps, and against Thunder Dragon, it just gets rid of their Colossus, so you can attempt to play the game through it. I would consider it very important, but I would absolutely drop those for Mind Control and Super Polys if I had them. And then last up, for a card that I can't really put into any defined role because it's just way too versatile, obviously. Like I said with the last profile, is Mash Change. I will make a video discussing Mash Changes, like the many roles Mash Change could play, but just for the sake of keeping this video shorter, I'm just not going to talk about it as much since it's just incredibly versatile. And that wraps up the main deck at exactly 40. I am not a fan of... I will almost never consider playing main decks that are more than 40 cards because I want to remain as consistent as possible, which is the purpose of this deck for me. And for the extra deck, 1 Deanne, still pretty standard. I am contemplating cutting him, and for the most part, I would consider like any build that's just running 1 Solid Soldier to not bother, because you're not going to see it at all. So, his inclusion is debatable, but he is still really powerful, and is a card that can convert losses to wins. So, it's still very powerful, and like I would be more skeptical to cut him than compared to other cards. So, it is what it is. I think this is still I still think this is just fine if you're playing 2 Solid Soldier. 1 Dystopia, very important for Fusion Destiny. I sometimes also just regularly fusion summon it, so, which is kind of the perk of having multiple fusion spells in the deck that you can get off of Ion. But, yeah, most of the time you're summoning this off Fusion Destiny, and for the pop effect, you can burn for damage and time, which is also really good, and can just sometimes steal and win. But, for the most part, you're just going to be using this to further oppress the opponent. 1 Adoration, easily the single, least important card in this, but most important card in this extra deck, because you need it so you can extend your fusion plays as getting Solid Soldier Graveyard effect and all that. But it just doesn't do anything going first, which is the big problem. And the reason why people are debating Sunriser over this, although personally I feel like any build running Fusion Destiny should really just play this upper Sunriser, so that way they're not locked out of their two material fusion slot. And I don't know. It's really just up to personal preference. I may play Sunriser when it comes out if it's cheap enough, but for the most part, I foresee myself just sticking with Adoration. One Anki. It doesn't come up often, but when it does, it's amazing. So being able to hit over things, add more mash changes, being able to do more damage in the battle phase, it really fits well and complements the OTK strategy. So it's obviously always going to be a staple inclusion. We got the one Divine Wind. This is definitely going to be like a free cut for a Super Poly target when I get Super Poly, or really just like anything else, because I've never made this card once. Even the situations where people would theoretically make this, they never come up for me either. Like, my Stratos never gets Veilored or Impermanenced, because people don't play Veilor really that much anymore, and Impermanence, I don't know how, people just never draw Impermanence against my Stratos on Dueling Book or whatever, but I've never summoned this card once, and I'm absolutely going to cut it if I can. Trinity, Win Condition. 2 Dark Law, secondary win condition, and Dangerous because it makes Fusion Destiny the best card in this deck by far. And that will do it for the fusions. There's absolutely room for fusion for Super Poly targets here. Really just like cutting these 2 Masters here would just make the room for the targets. Emerald is also a debatable choice as far as like room for Super Poly targets, but I absolutely love Emerald for its interaction with the draw hand. And just making your turn 2 plays that much better. And that's the only XC I'm running. Sometimes I wish I had a second XC, not necessarily, well, Emerald's limited still, but like sometimes I wish I had like a second XC. But, in those situations though, I probably would have won regardless. 1 Decimator for going in for max damage. It can also boost Dystopia as well. But it inflicts piercing as well. It's just there for pushing for game. Wonder Driver helping you recycle your fusion spells and change quick plays from your graveyard, as well as helping you dodge Super Poly, because it's light and everything else on the field will most likely be dark. So if you just end with this plus Dark Law, you'll avoid Super Poly for the most part, unless it's a hero mirror match, in which case I'm fucked regardless. 2 Cross Crusader, very important staple to have in the extra deck because it helps facilitate so many plays. It's kind of like the biggest love-hate card in this extra deck for me, because of the fact it doesn't allow you to use cards other than heroes if you special summon them, which I really dislike, but I've grown not to really be bothered by much now. And then for the last link, we're playing a Beat Cop. When we get Cloth Thief, I'm obviously going to play Cloth Thief over this, because this card actually doesn't do anything, it's just there for the arrows. So, yeah. When we actually get a generic link 2 that does something, like Beat Cop will actually just be gone. And that will do it for the extra deck. There weren't any changes made to my extra deck, but I have plans for it if I have better cards available to me in the future. So yeah, moving on to the side deck, there have been a few changes to this as well. Most importantly, 3 Lancia. When I made my first profile, the format was still not defined as far as what the best deck would be, but obviously now that Orcust are taking over completely, with multiple variants of it, like, this card's pretty much a no-brainer. So yeah, 3 Twin Twister back in the side deck because I absolutely hated it in the main deck. But it was good. It was a good idea in theory, but it just turned out terrible in practice because no, it's just not that great in the main deck. But it is a very important card in the format, and it should always at least be sided. 3 Spell Fragrance. The whole thing about the Spell Fragrance is that, yeah, Pendulums do exist, and Pendulums can be a really hard matchup because they're the best break my board type deck in the game right now, because they have negates for everything. So going first against them and flipping Spell Fragrance can be a win condition, but really, Spell Fragrance is just good against anything that has a heavy spell reliance, like True Draco, flip Spell Fragrance, and now they can't get to their consistency engine. Stuff like that. Anything that really relies on having spell starters, or anything that really relies on, say, like Ritual Summoning, like Necroz, although not quite as relevant, still works wonders against them. And to go along with, like, Traps deciding for going first, still 3 Summon Limit, very important. This card's not being cited as much in the metagame now, but I still think it's very important to have, especially for a deck that has, like, a mini control aspect to it with Darklaw, Plasma, and Dystopia. Being able to just limit the amount of cards that the opponent can put on the board is very important. As well as, like Stratos also has interactions with Anti-Spell, where your opponent has to set their cards, and Stratos can just clear them. But so the combination of these two can be very oppressive. but there aren't that many matchups where they'd actually be sided together. And for the last card, 3-red reboot, this card is disgusting. I don't know why it was made, but it's amazing, so yeah. Amazing against True Draco, amazing against Altergeist. Don't play it in a deck that's not geared towards OTKing or just winning the turn you would use this, because then, now you just have 4,000, now you just have half of your life points gone and not really anything to show for it, except for maybe maybe a push for damage and some board advantage, but yeah. Thanks, thank you guys for watching. That was the deck profile. Hopefully, I can upload a little bit more frequently. I want to keep this going steadily, but, I got priorities in life that I have to tend to. So, yeah. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment. Just give me your input, and I will happily listen to what you people have to say, and I will take your thoughts to heart. So, yeah, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.